What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review Kinds of Kindness, the latest movie from director Yorgos Lanthimos, which is now in limited release, so not to worry. I won't give away any spoilers, or at least I'll give you fair warning before I do, and I'll include a time code in the description below so you know where the spoilers begin, because there's one joke in this movie, or one beat, or one scene that's so goddamn funny, I have to call attention to it, but it is a massive spoiler, so I'll save that for the end of the video. But I was a little wary going into this because I knew in advance it was an anthology movie, which is nearly 3 hours long, and I barely slept last night because I was editing this video about the 50th anniversary of the film Chinatown, which I'll also include a link to down below. But the good news is, even though I was completely exhausted and spent going into it, up until about the 2/3 mark of the movie, it was my favorite movie of 2024, and I was just having an absolute blast. And at that point, either I ran out of energy, or the movie did, or a little bit of both. But throughout the movie's considerable running time, I was consistently thrilled and delighted and entertained by Yorgos Lanthimos' signature brand of storytelling, with all the strange, off-putting, odd humor, all the deranged, ritualistic, superficial behavior, and of course, generous quantities of nudity and violence that I've come to love and adore in his work. And I think my audience was more or less on the same wavelength as well, because they were howling with laughter, or at least some of them were howling with laughter. I say my theater was about 50% full down at the Angelica on Houston Street, and that was a little alarming to me because I feel like a Yorgos Lanthimos movie should definitely pack the house on opening weekend, especially when it's in limited release. And as we've seen with Lanthimos' last two movies, The Favorite and Poor Things, he's one of the rare directors in the world right now where he can actually fill up the auditoriums at these traditional art house theaters or specialty theaters, however you choose to describe them. But this is one of those movies that had me just cackling with like evil glee. And the reason I stress the word evil is that this is a movie that gets off on showing the audience some seriously unhinged behavior, like self-mutilation, but self-mutilation played for laughs. I mean, I was like grimacing and like contorting in my chair and like, writhing in agony, all while smiling and laughing and having a great time. And his brand of humor is very specific, and it's kind of hard to define or characterize, but I would say at a minimum it could be described as deadpan. You have a lot of very unusual actors delivering their lines and doing things in a very strange, almost kind of absent-minded way, and it takes a while. You almost have to kind of educate yourself on how to enjoy his sense of humor. But once you've seen a handful of his movies, I think I've seen 7 at this point. I've seen Dogtooth, I've seen Alps, I've seen the Lobster, Killing of a Sacred Deer, The Favorite, Poor Things, now Kinds of Kindness. So I've seen 7 movies, and only now do I finally feel like I'm starting to kind of get like a firm grasp on his style of humor. And to all the hardcore fans of Yorgos Lanthimos out there, the hardcore fans of his earlier movies who may have been a little cold on his recent movies, I know that some hardcore fans who have been with him, every step of the way, they kind of don't necessarily like The Favorite and Poor Things quite as much. I wouldn't say they describe it as like him selling out or going mainstream, but they're definitely more accessible, bigger budget, more glamorous, and it's why they win shitloads of awards and make lots of money. I mean, both The Favorite and Poor Things made over $100 million worldwide, which is incredibly rare in the world of foreign films and specialty films and that sort of thing. But if you prefer the much more niche appeal of a movie like Alps, I think Kinds of Kindness is going to be right up your alley, which probably means that this movie is going to lose every single dollar of all $15 million that were invested in it. Because no matter how great an anthology movie might be, it's always going to be a tough sell for most general audiences, because you have 3 unrelated stories. They're all weird as fucking shit, and they all star the same actors, but in different roles with each story. So they're not even connected in terms of like the actual narrative or the backdrop or anything like that. And I think the big challenge faced by a lot of anthology movies is that the audience is required to kind of reset between each segment. They have to reset emotionally, they have to reset like in terms of their curiosity. And so even really cool anthology movies like The Ballad of Buster Scruggs or Creepshow or Sin City or Black Sabbath, and Black Sabbath might be my favorite anthology film, but those movies, they don't necessarily generate big box office. I think anthology movies work a little better if you kind of disguise the fact that it's an anthology movie. Like Pulp Fiction was written like an anthology movie, but they kind of interwove all the stories, almost like a snake eating its own tail, so you didn't even quite realize, oh, I'm watching different stories, but it all feels like one big comprehensive narrative. But getting back to the commercial prospects for this movie, I feel like Yorgos Lanthimos' hardcore fans are going to feel like they're pulling up their chair next to a nice warm fire, because you won't necessarily like all 3 stories equally, but I guarantee at least one of them is going to absolutely scratch that itch if you're a Yorgos Lanthimos fan. Like, for my money, I think I like the first segment the most I think the second one had the most outrageous kind of entertainment value, and the third one was when I start to feel myself kind of like sagging in my seat. But they were all worth watching, and I look forward to rewatching all of them and kind of savoring all the little details. But when it comes to like how well would this do in the theaters, I'd be shocked and amazed if this movie sells even half the tickets of a movie like The Favorite or Poor Things, and that's in spite of the fact that the movie features one of the most incredible casts that you can possibly imagine. So as I mentioned before, most of the cast plays multiple roles across all three short films contained within Kinds of Kindness, but the main cast features Emma Stone, Jesse Plemons, and I feel like Jesse Plemons could very easily walk home with an Oscar in March of next year. We got the great Willem Dafoe, Margaret Qualley, Hong Chow, John Alwyn, Mamadou Athie, I have no idea how to pronounce that, and Hunter Schafer. And I think pretty much every actor is very well served by this. It's a showcase for the acting talents because there's no like big special effects or action scenes. Man, there's some hell raising with this. I think it's a Dodge Challenger or a Dodge Charger. I know jack shit about cars, but there's a really cool early 70s muscle car that is used to great effect in the third segment. But mostly it's just people talking in rooms and either like slapping each other or making out with each other or making fun of each other or just being fucking weird and strange. And I was pretty much just kind of, smiling in this demonic fashion throughout the majority of the movie. But here is the official premise, ripped straight from the pages of Wikipedia. Kinds of Kindness, described as a triptych fable, consists of three distinct but loosely connected stories. The first segment, The Death of RMF, follows a man struggling to take charge of his own destiny, follow him quitting his powerful job that dictates what he does in a day. The second, RMF is Flying, depicts a man plagued by suspicions that his spouse, who has recently returned after being reported missing, is an imposter. And the final segment, RMF Eats a Sandwich, revolves around a cultist after being kicked out of said cult for being contaminated, vehemently attempting to fulfill her task to find a specific person with the ability to resurrect the dead. And while this is an original movie that's written by Yorgos Lanthimos and Efthimis Philippou, if I'm saying that name at all correctly, it reminds me of like a great collection of short stories by someone like Raymond Carver. Like there's certain, I guess, humorists of the 20th century that would write these incredible, collections of short stories where they were just like completely deranged, going in a million different directions. And I was just absolutely thrilled and delighted by the completely fearless way this movie just leans into some of the strangest shit that you will see in a movie all year. But what are the standouts? Once again, no spoilers yet, but Emma Stone's incredible in this, and once again, her her creative intelligence and her taste. I continue to be impressed with her just as an actress. She's absolutely fearless. She's not afraid to take her top off from time to time, or her bottom off, depending upon which Yorgos Lanthimos movie we're discussing. But the same holds true for Margaret Qualley. I mean, both of these actresses are very easy on the eyes. They have interesting taste in material, and anytime actresses are willing to kind of, bear all for a completely eccentric filmmaker, to put it mildly, in what is being described as an absurdist black comedy anthology, well, then my hat's off to everybody, because these kinds of productions can easily backfire in your face. And Hunter Schafer from Euphoria is called upon to take a few similar risks in this movie as well, but her part is much smaller than the other two actresses. Like Margaret Qualley and Emma Stone, they're in all three segments. But the real showstopper of this movie is Jesse Plemons. And I've been watching this kid, or I call him a kid, he's an adult, but I always think of him as a kid because I discovered him on that show Friday Night Lights when he still was a kid, but we've watched him grow up. And somehow along the way, he became one of the world's great character actors, where he can be fucking hilarious when called upon. He can be disturbing when called upon. And he's rapidly assembling a pretty incredible filmography. I mean, he goes all the way back to movies like Varsity Blues in 1999. He's like a little kid when he's like, there's like two people at the fight, and he's like, get him, he's chicken. Or anyway, he has some weird line, but his voice hasn't even changed yet. But over the years since he appeared in Friday Night Lights, I'm just having a quick glance at his filmography, but he was really good in The Master from Paul Thomas Anderson. He was really good in Bridge of Spies. I mean, right there, he's already worked with Paul Thomas Anderson as well as Steven Spielberg. Like, you would consider yourself more or less a success at that point, but he was fucking hysterical in Game Night. Game Night's a comedy. I feel like in an era where we've had precious few comedies, Game Night kind of slipped in under the radar, but it's actually a surprisingly funny movie. But he worked with Scorsese on The Irishman. He worked on El Camino, a Breaking Bad movie. He worked on Killers of the Flower Moon, once again, with Martin Scorsese. He was in Civil War, and everybody felt like he was the best part of Civil War, and I agree. That scene was absolutely bone-chilling. It's like more of those scenes, and I feel like Civil War would have been even more successful But if Jesse Plemons is going to win any awards in the early part of next year, it's going to be because of the first segment, the death of RMF, where he presents this incredible landscape of so many conflicting emotions, where it's sometimes he's pitiful, sometimes he's pathetic, sometimes he's hilarious, sometimes your heart goes out to him, but like, he plays a character who's just at the end of his rope with such desperation and such rage. And I was just, fucking cracking up watching him interact with his completely domineering and tyrannical and wildly demanding boss who's willing to shower you with houses and exotic gifts as long as you give him complete and total obedience and subservience to every single whim. He's the quintessential boss from hell, but the boss from hell through the lens of a maniac like Yorgos Lanthimos. And Margaret Qualley is incredible in that first segment. And I'll say this: that first segment, it's going to bring back the miniskirt in a big way, in a way like we haven't seen since the late 60s. Like, somebody made a joke recently of how there's 1 year in the late 60s where every month the skirts kept getting like a half-inch shorter or an inch shorter and that sort of thing, until basically there were no skirts anymore. But both Margaret Qualley and Emma Stone seem to be having a ton of fun with the wild outfits on display in that first segment. But yeah, I think it was a bold choice to have that segment up front, because you always want to make a positive first impression. However, then you run the risk of having to live up to that strong segment for the rest of the movie. And once again, I'll need to watch it again to know, does that third segment not completely measure up, or was I just sagging and that sort of thing? And if you're tired of hearing me complain about being tired and just say, like, do the review tomorrow, well, starting at midnight tonight, a little DLC for Elden Ring called Shadows of the Erdtree is coming out, and so for like the next 24 to 48 hours, I'm going to be completely focused on a very different kind of media experience from Kinds of Kindness. But I'll be thinking about Kinds of Kindness every step of the way. But what else can we say without diving into spoilers? I'll just say that in general, I really just like the fact that Yorgos Lanthimos exists, because I feel like in our rather anemic film culture in 2024, we've got plenty of art house directors that are working in total obscurity, making movies for very little money that they eventually get picked up by Amazon or Netflix, dropped on some streaming service, whereupon they get swallowed up and they just completely vanish and disappear. And I feel like if your movie's just playing at festivals and on a streaming platform, it just feels a little more disposable. It feels more like content, it feels more like a YouTube video. But when a movie has a robust theatrical run, where people are actually like going out to dinner and bars and the movie, making an entire evening of it, it just sticks in our collective kind of cultural heritage with much more stickiness, for lack of a better word. And it just makes the movies feel real, and it makes them feel part of the culture, and it gives them a longer shelf life. And if you're on an airplane or you're going through a streaming service and you see a movie that's played in theaters, like a lot of theaters, versus one that hasn't, it's like, all right, that movie feels real, and that one, well, I don't know what to think about that. And Yorgos Lanthimos is one of the only art house directors out there right now who's managed to figure out, like, how do I turn weird fucking movies into big business? And I think if you're making movies for between $10 and $20 million, and they're grossing around 100, yeah, that is big business. Like, everybody wants to be in the Yorgos Lanthimos business, and there are just not a lot of peers that are operating on that level. And I think Emma Stone, holy shit, she's shown incredible taste and vision and foresight, hitching her wagon to his as a producer, working with him now 3 times in a row, because I think she recognizes, God damn, there's just not a lot of directors out there who are taking these kinds of big creative risks, taking these big gambles and making them work out more or less, and developing, a rabid fan base. And I feel like every actress should be so lucky to have a director like Yorgos Lanthimos, which they can work with again and again with, oftentimes fantastic final results. But I think I've showered enough praise on Yorgos Lanthimos in his career at this point. And if you're not up to speed on his movies, I don't know where to start. I would say if you like really eccentric, esoteric, off the beaten track humor, go to the earlier part of his career. And if you like more kind of accessible movies, then go to the latter part of his career. And Kinds of Kindness, because it has so many movie stars, probably has kind of one foot in both worlds. But I do need to give a shout out to one of his oldest collaborators, who I feel like his career would be very different in the absence of her contributions. But the actress is, hang on, it's a Greek actress, so I'm going to probably screw up the pronunciation of her name, but Angeliki Papoulia, if I'm saying that at all correctly. Once again, she's a Greek actress. So I don't speak a word of Greek, but I feel like every weird director needs actors who understand how to bring their words and their ideas to the screen. Like, it doesn't do you a bit of good to be the world's most talented filmmaker if you can't find the right actors to flesh out your ideas. And when it comes to his really specific sense of humor, holy shit, she really knows how to sell that. And she was in Dogtooth, she was in Alps, she was in The Lobster. I don't know if she's in any of his other movies, but she's fantastic. She's really good in Alps, and I feel like as great as Emma Stone has been in Yorgos Lanthimos' recent movies, it's really Angeliki Papalia who is like the perfect actor for capturing the Yorgos Lanthimos flavor. So if you like to go to the dark side and go to the weird side, check out a movie like Alps, and let me know what you think, because it's definitely not for everybody, but for some people, it's absolutely like just right for them. But with all that praise out of the way, I have two quick spoilers that I have to discuss, and they come from the second segment of the movie called RMF is Flying. And as I mentioned before in my synopsis, basically I have a situation where people were lost at sea and they're found on a desert island, and you're not quite sure like how they've been surviving, what have they been living on, were they like eating each other or fruit or animals. But anyway, Jesse Plemons, he's worried about his wife, who's played by Emma Stone, and when she finally returns, he just feels like something's different about her and that something's off about her. But the scene that just had me like rolling in the aisles, just convulsing with laughter, prior to her return, he has his favorite couple over for a dinner, and they're reminiscing about his wife and like, where might she be, and let's hope she's okay. And he keeps saying like, well, do you want to watch one of our old videos? And like you just assume that's like going to be them, like, you know, dancing at a wedding, or, you know, posing on vacation, or something stupid along those lines. And finally, Margaret Qualley is like, all right, let's watch one of the videos. And they cut to this full-blown four-way, this orgy between the two couples, where both girls are having sex with their husbands from behind. And you're just like, the movie goes from like very calm and kind of sad and contemplative to just completely insane and deranged like that. And I just couldn't believe just how outrageous it was. And I was just fucking cracking up. And I just love the fact that these actresses are like, yeah, like we'll do the scene, who cares? And I'm sure Jesse Plemons was like, yeah, I'll do that scene. Let's ask my wife Kirsten Dunst, make sure she's okay with it first. But the scene was just so goddamn funny. And I feel like comedy and sex, when done right, go together so well. It's just as entertaining to see sex and comedy stirred together as it is to see sex and horror stirred together. You just have to know how to tell your story and how to make the scene play in satisfying fashion. And that scene, holy shit, it plays. But when the character played by Emma Stone in that segment finally returns, and Jesse Plemons is plagued by all these suspicions that she may or may not be his actual wife, at one point she's describing to him, I think she's describing a dream she had where she's on this island where all the roles are reversed, where the dogs are in charge and humans are basically living off their scraps. And she's obsessed with eating, I think she's obsessed with eating veal or pork chops or lamb chops, but for whatever reason, the dogs are always able to get to the meat first. And it's just, she's telling you this really strange story where like, where is this going? What's going to be the payoff? Or is this just some little random bit? But the payoff finally comes because at the end of each of the three segments, they have a very brief credit sequence before diving into the next segment. And during the credit sequence for the second segment, we do get a few scenes from that world where the dogs are in charge and like the dogs are driving cars and just doing all sorts of crazy shit. The scene is just fucking hilarious, especially if you're a dog lover. And so I have not laughed that hard at any movie in the theater all year long. So Kinds of Kindness, I think even though I've cooled a bit on it and it's not going to be my favorite movie of 2024, maybe it will be, depends upon what comes out the rest of the year, but it's definitely going to be in my top 5. And even if some critics are criticizing the movie, calling it misanthropic, I'm like, I don't see how you can call it misanthropic. Maybe it's got dark humor at the expense of some people where they're getting chopped into a million pieces or, you know, dying in horrible traffic accidents and that sort of thing. But the movie's making us laugh at the absurdities of human behavior. And I think what Yorgos Lanthimos does better than any other filmmaker alive, he really zeroes in on and calls attention to our own hypocrisies and superficial behavior. Like whether you're talking about your behavior at work or your behavior when you're out to dinner with your family or if you're out to dinner with like couples. But we all like go through the motions and say and do certain things just to kind of, you know, maintain peace in the valley. But oftentimes like people have to like resort to really strange behavior or almost kind of completely deranged behavior just to kind of go on with this thing called life. And I feel like Yorgos Lanthimos is a master at like having little cutaways where somebody's just doing something completely like deranged. We're like, oh my God, that reminds me so much of like, you know, my weird family member or my weird coworker or like it. And very few directors are willing to just be so ruthless when it comes to calling attention to all of our strange behavior. So some people might find him misanthropic. I just think he's brutally honest about just how weird and strange and unusual human behavior can be. And yeah, he makes me laugh, and he makes me laugh hard. And for that, I am indebted to the great Yorgos Lanthimos. And no matter what movies he wants to make for the rest of his career, I will always be there day one, first in line. Also, before I wrap up this video, I do want to come to the defense of Yorgos Lanthimos. Not that he needs me to come to his defense at all, but last year he posted a list of some of his all-time favorite movies. And some of them are pretty obvious classics like The Shining, and some of them are more obscure, kind of, really kind of rough art house classics. Movies like Naked by Mike Leigh from 1993, which is fucking awesome. But I noticed a lot of people saying, oh, what a film, bro. Like, how come he likes all these obscure movies? But it's like, go fuck yourself. I'm looking at this list right now. Some of the movies are like Jaws, which I think we can all agree is a cool flick. Some movies are like Barry Lyndon, which once upon a time didn't necessarily have that big of a fan base, but now a lot of people regard it as Stanley Kubrick's best movie. But it's like, when you're talking about a filmmaker like Yorgos Lanthimos, do you expect him to say, oh, Harry Potter is my favorite movie? Like, no, you expect him to say things like Les Samurai by Jean-Pierre Melville. Like, that makes absolute perfect sense to me. Or Viridiana by Luis Buñuel, or North by Northwest by Alfred Hitchcock. There's this new streak of anti-intellectualism and anti-curiosity, or just anti-culture, where people are so threatened by the idea of watching any movie that requires you to have an attention span, or a movie that might actually be challenging to watch, where you actually have to kind of sit up and pay attention. Like, not every movie is going to be a TikTok video of a puppy kissing babies. Like, that's very easy to watch. Sometimes movies are challenging to watch, and sometimes Yorgos Lanthimos' movies are challenging to watch. But definitely hunt down that list online. I mean, there's a ton of good stuff on there, like Amadeus by Milos Forman, which I absolutely love. But for all the people out there who like claim he's a film bro, go fuck yourselves. Your contributions to film discourse are useless. And on that note, I'm going to wrap this video up. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Hope everybody gives this movie a chance. Once again, I'm not expecting this movie to appeal to everybody, but there are going to be some people where they feel like, yeah, like the porridge is just right for their tastes and sensibilities. And I'll be very curious to hear what people think about this completely fucking wild movie. Maybe a good comparison would be the Argentinian anthology movie called Wild Tales. I think it came out like 10 years ago. But that, I feel like that's a good comp when it comes to format, humor, style, different short films and that sort of thing. But that was a really cool anthology movie. Or Kwaidan, really good Japanese anthology horror film from the 1960s. And there are even movies like Fantasia. Like, Fantasia feels like an anthology movie, even if it is underneath the umbrella of Fantasia. So I love a good anthology movie, but they do tend to struggle when it comes to finding a big audience. But now I'm repeating myself. Time to wrap this sucker up. Please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell. I greatly appreciate it. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.